if you haven't been here before, we especially welcome you as we bring artists into our beautiful lobby, and we're just so lucky to be able to display a gallery every once in a while, so I'm glad you're all here to enjoy it today. Kazuyoshi Miyoshi received the Kimura Ibei Award for his photography book, Rakuen, which is Paradise in Japanese. He was 27 at the time, it was 1985, and he was actually the youngest photographer to receive that award at the time. Beginning with a visit to Okinawa at the age of 13, Miyoshi traveled extensively to photograph regions all over the world. He applied this theme of paradise to the collection of the photographs that we see here from all of his travels around the world. His works are included in permanent collections of the George Eastman House International Museum of Photography and Film in the United States. Mr. Miyoshi's book of photographs, The World of Heritage in Japan, which is the exhibition here today, was published in 1998. And since 1999, the Japan Foundation has purchased 67 photos from the World Heritage Sites in Japan in order to promote Japanese culture. And the World of Heritage Sites in Japan photography exhibition has been held in many locations throughout the world. So we're just very lucky to be one of them today. Since 2007, he has been photographing images of National Treasure Buddha statues in Kyoto and Nara. Also, since 2008, he's been photographing Kyoto Goshi Imperial Palace and Katsuruki Detached Palace.
Thank you, Kato, for organizing this exhibit, to the Japan Foundation for providing these photos. So we're here tonight to view and celebrate UNESCO recognition of Japanese natural and cultural heritage. All countries, of course, have sites of local or national interest, which are sources of national pride, but that UNESCO World Heritage List recognizes sites that have outstanding universal value, representing the best of cultural diversity and natural beauty throughout the world. So today around the world there are 1,052 such recognized sites in 165 countries, and Japan has been honored with 20 of these awards. Sites that are inscribed on the World Heritage List benefit from increased public awareness of the values of these places, and they have a significant effect on attracting tourists from around the globe. UNESCO recognition further helps raise national awareness for heritage preservation and for things like sustainable tourism. So sites, once they're recognized, are provided with expert guidance from UNESCO to implement comprehensive management plans to enable sustained tourism, preservation, and management. In UNESCO parlance, you have cultural heritage and natural heritage. So cultural heritage refers to things like monuments, buildings, sites that have historical value or particularly archaeological or scientific value, where natural heritage refers to outstanding physical, biological, or geological formations, also to habitats and endangered plants or animals, or to areas that have some specific scientific, conservation, or aesthetic values. So this exhibition contains outstanding examples of both the cultural and natural heritage of the 20 sites recognized in Japan for natural heritage sites, and we have photographs of all of those here. And then we have photos of some of the 16 cultural sites. Now, some of you may be looking around and saying, well, what about Mount Fuji? Like, shouldn't that be, that's one of the major icons of Japan, shouldn't that be a natural site? We don't have a photograph here, but actually it's recognized as a cultural site by UNESCO because it has been a site of a religious pilgrimage, it's a sacred site, and it has served over the centuries as a source for artistic inspiration. I wanted to also talk about the intangible heritage program that UNESCO runs. So in 2003, the World Heritage Program has been operating since 1972. In 2003, they started a new program called the Intangible Cultural Heritage of Humanity. And this is because UNESCO recognized that culture doesn't just stop at monuments or buildings. There are many traditions that are inherited from ancestors and passed on to descendants, like how to conduct rituals, or how to make certain kinds of crafts, or different forms of performing arts. So those types of heritage are very important in maintaining cultural diversity around the world in this period of increasing globalization. So for intangible cultural heritage, as of 2016, there were 429 practices, and Japan has had 21 practices recognized. And this is a very broad-ranging list. So it includes, classical theater arts like Noh theater, kabuki, bunraku puppet theater, or gagaku, classical court music. But there are also local craft traditions that are recognized, like handmade paper making, washi making, or different kinds of fabric production techniques. And 13 other awards recognize a wide variety of festivals, religious and agricultural rituals, and unique forms of music and dance that are practiced throughout Japan. And probably one of the awards that Japan has gotten a lot of notice for is that in 2013, traditional Japanese cuisine, or washoku, was awarded with intangible World Heritage, or World Heritage status. So it was the third such country after France and Mexico to have its cuisine recognized. UNESCO's also recognized the Mediterranean diet. So how this works is countries have to put forward proposals, and then a big bureaucratic committee kind of decides. So sometimes countries can get together for the Mediterranean diet. Greece, Italy, Morocco, and Spain got together and made this proposal, diets based on, olive oil and Greek yogurt and I don't know what else. But also specific food practices have been recognized. So communal kimchi making in Korea, Croatian gingerbread and Turkish coffee are also other food practices. And as you may or may not know, Japanese cuisine right now is incredibly hot. It's just everywhere. And part of the reason for this is Michelin started rating Japanese restaurants in 2006, and Tokyo consistently has more stars than Paris and New York combined. And then when you look at like Michelin stars in New York, the most frequently appearing foreign restaurants are Japanese restaurants. So from Japan's high cuisine to things like ramen, really Japanese food has been exploding across the U.S. I moved to Austin in 2003. There was one place I can think of where you could get kind of authentic food, and now there are so many different places, and even dedicated ramen restaurants. Ramen Tatsuya won the best ramen in the U.S. From Time Out last year. So I've welcomed very much the expansion of Japanese cuisine in Austin. You see, one thing I did want to note is that it was actually a Japanese Director General of UNESCO who initiated the Intangible Program. So, the Natural and Cultural Program had been in place for years, but he held the directorship of UNESCO from 1999 to 2009, and he based the new Intangible Program on Japan's own laws that are popularly known as living national treasures. So the Intangible Cultural Properties Law that was established in 1950 to recognize performing arts or crafts techniques. So within Japan, many more performing recognized by the nation, 53 performing arts traditions and 54 craft traditions. So they provide financial assistance to these artisans to make sure that the arts that they're practicing, often in rural areas and endangered because maybe there's not somebody who wants to come in into an apprenticeship. So this program really helps to ensure the continuity of these different arts traditions and have been invaluable in really maintaining these regional traditions. So to conclude then, Japan has been an important component of UNESCO's programs to recognize World Heritage, both as a recipient of numerous awards and as a model and motivating force for recognizing and placing high value on traditional culture. I want to close with a quote from UNESCO. Heritage is our legacy from the past, what we live with today, and what we pass on to future generations. Our cultural and natural heritage are both irreplaceable sources of life and inspiration. They are our touchstones, our points of reference, our identity.
Konbanwa. I'm Evan Taniguchi. I'm third generation Taniguchi family. We've been in Austin since about 1960. My grandfather was the gentleman that created the Taniguchi Gardens in Silver Park. My father was the dean of the School of Architecture, so I'm actually a second generation architect, and I'm proud to tell everybody that I'm Texas-born Japanese. You know, most people say they're American-born Japanese, but I'm Texas-born Japanese. I was born in South Texas. We moved here in 1963. When we moved in here, my brother and I were there were about 6 Asian Americans in the Austin Independent School District in 1963, if you can believe it. There was one Chinese food restaurant there was Lung's, it was on South Congress. And gosh, after that, I mean, now we're the fastest growing population. Asian Americans are the fastest growing population in Austin right now. So when Kako-san called me up, she asked me to talk about architecture. And I'm kind of a modern architect. I like Tadao Ando. He did the Modern Museum in Fort Worth. And there's a Yoshi Taniguchi who is not related to me, but he's like the hottest architect right now from Japan in the United States. He was the architect of the Asia House in Houston. If y'all have not seen that yet, it's just as good as Ando's Museum in Fort Worth. So she asked me to speak about architecture, and I said, well, I can talk 30 hours about architecture. So we kind of narrowed it down to the temples and the shrines, since a lot of these photographs depict the temples and the shrines. And I had no idea about this stuff, so I actually read up on this, and I'm going to have to read this to you, but it was very educational for me to kind of learn about the history, especially of the temples and the shrines, because, I mean, there were magnificent buildings back then. So I'm going to kind of read this to you because I'm not the expert, and please bear with me. But in Japan, Buddhist temples coexist with Shinto shrines, and both share the basic features of Japanese traditional architecture. Not only can tori, the gates that you enter into the Shinto, not only are they Shinto, but they can be found in both the Shinto and the Buddhist temples. But the entrance to a shrine can be marked by a romon, a gate which is Buddhist in origin, and can therefore very often be found also at temples. Some shrines have a Buddhist-style main gate called somon. Many temples have a tenizuya and komainu, like a shrine. Conversely, some shrines make use of incense and have a shoro bell tower. Others, for example, Kanjan, Jinja, and Nara may even have a pagoda. Similarities between temples and shrines are also functional. Like a shrine, a Buddhist temple is not primarily a place for worship. Its most important buildings are used for the safekeeping of sacred objects, like the honzon, equivalent to a shrine's shintai, and are not accessible to worshipers. Unlike a Christian church, a temple is also a monastery. A monastery. There are specialized buildings for certain rites, but these are usually open only to a limited number of participants. Religious mass gatherings do not take place with regularity as with Christian religions and are in any event not held inside the temple. If many people are involved in the ceremony, it will assume a festive character and will be held outdoors. The reason for the great structural resemblances between the two lies in their common history. It is in fact normal for a temple to have done also a shrine, and in architectural terms, obvious differences between the two and therefore are therefore few, so much that often only a specialist can see them. Shrines enshrining local kami, and I remember kami from a long time ago, my grandparents used to say, and I thought it meant God, is that right? Kami?
Spirit?
Kami-sama, they would talk about kami-sama.
Kami.
When I was growing up, yeah. But anyway, shrines enshrining local kami existed long before the arrival of Buddhism, but they consisted either of demarcated land areas without any building or of temporary shrines erected when needed. With the arrival of Buddhism in Japan in the 6th century, shrines were subjected to its influence and adopted both the concept of permanent structures and the architecture of Buddhist temples. So most of these pictures here, you'll see that they're 6th century or 7th century temples. The successive development of Shinbutsu Shugo, that's syncretism of Buddhism and kami worship, and of the Honji Suijaku theory brought to the almost complete fusion of kami worship and Buddhism. It became normal for shrines to be accompanied by temples in mixed complexes called Jinguji, shrine temple, or Miyadera. The opposite was also common. Most temples had at least a small shrine dedicated to the tutelary kami and were therefore called Jisha. The Meiji era eliminated most Jinguji, but left Jisha intact. So much so that even today, most temples have at least one, sometimes very large shrine on their premises, and Buddhist goddess Benzalten is often worshipped at Shinto shrines. As a consequence, for centuries, shrines and temples had a symbiotic relationship where each influenced the other. Shrines took from Buddhism its gate, mon, the use of a hall for lay worshipers, the use of vermilion-colored wood, and more. While Chinese Buddhist architecture was adapted to Japanese tastes with more asymmetrical layouts, greater use of natural materials, and adaptation of the monastery to the pre-existing natural environment. The clear separation between Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines, which today is the norm, emerges only as a result of the Shinbutsu Bunin law of 1868. This separation was mandated by law, and many shrine temples were focused to become just shrines, among the famous ones like Usa Hachiman-gu and Tsuruga Oko Hachiman-gu. So I think that gives you a little bit of background that there is a close resemblance between the shrines and the temples. And if you really want to learn more about the history, it's very, just pronouncing the words is tough. But to understand all that, there's a whole lot of history. And I was surprised that the Chinese had such influence on the Japanese architecture because, like I said, I'm a modernist and I love the modernism in Japan, the 60s and the 70s, and I like what they're doing now with Tao Ando and Taniguchi. So I encourage y'all to do more study about it because it's very cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.